Hello and welcome to another recording of Building Automation Monthly. We are going to be going through the fundamentals of building automation security today. So what you're seeing on the screen is a brief Visio drawing that represents on the right side the internal client network and on the left side a remote network, whether that be a home network or a remote VPN access, branch office, etc. So a couple key things we're going to go through before you actually read the article. That way, kind of gives you the fundamentals of everything you kind of need to know around security for building automation. So the first thing we're going to discuss in the article is local and remote access. Now, local access would be, for example, accessing the building automation server from a local client or from the BAS server itself. Now you can see that I have VLAN 20 and VLAN 30, so the local access and the server are separated on virtual LANs. Now this is important because what this means is that this network traffic on the server is not sitting exposed on a public LAN. Additionally, it's segmented. That way you can apply filtering, you can apply access lists, etc. You can provide access lists even if it's on the same VLAN. It just becomes a little easier to manage. Alright, now public or private access is the next thing we're going to go through. Now, private access would be, for example, local right here. I'm accessing it on the local network from a computer that is on what we typically call LDAP, or your Active Directory. Okay, that's the actual protocol that's going to run your Active Directory. But what that basically means is that computer is locally managed by the IT group. So it's not that someone just comes and plugs in, they get an IP address and they're able to hit it. What's happening also is you could have a secure VPN connection. You could have an always on for like a branch office. You could have a remote access where they log in through a Cisco VPN client, something like that, and they're able to connect. Now, when you talk about public access, that means that the IP address, and this is a big no-no, the IP address is publicly exposed, meaning that this right here, actually right here, the BAS server, it may have a public IP. I doubt it'd probably have a private IP, but then its network address translated over here at the router, and it goes right through the firewall. Now, that's a big no-no to publicly expose this. I would always keep this as a private address, and what that means is then you can't access it from the internet. See, when you have it public accessed, when you have a public IP being shared, then all someone has to do is get that IP address. They can brute force the password, which means they just keep trying to get into the password, entering combinations until they finally break through. So, right off the bat, we've got a couple things here. One is we want to, and let me, here we go. What's up, left alignment? One, we want to segment by VLAN our server and clients. Okay. Two, ideally, server should have a private class IP address. Okay, let's keep going. Access list. Alright, so what an access list is basically is it's going to say what's allowed to have access. You have two types of access lists. You have standard and extended. Actually, there's more than just that, but those are the two ones people are most familiar with. The standard is going to be sitting here, and it's going to be the destination port. So the source port, it's going to filter right there. Alright, so what it would look like if I were to bring up a, we're not going to bring up an actual console, but basically you would set it up and you would say for traffic going to this IP address, whatever IP address, and you would say that this IP address is allowed to access this device. Alright, well, that would be like the BAS server IP. Now, you could do it a couple different ways. You could say HTTP, you could say TCP, or you could say port 80. So, for example, web traffic. Alright, so 80 is also HTTP. You could say TCP port 80 for reliable traffic. There's multiple different ways. You could filter the inbound. So right when something's coming in, you could say, nope, you're not allowed to access it. So you're going here, you're going to want to apply access lists. If you don't know how to do this, for example, most customers probably aren't going to allow you to have access to their switches or routers. So if you don't know how to do it and you don't have access, just tell them, hey, we want to set up an access list so only either these IP ranges, these clients, whatever, can access the computer. Now when you're doing like, it's late on a Sunday night. When you're doing, like pharmaceuticals or high technology, things of that nature, you may want to actually set, just like you would set a VPN connection, you would want to set an access list with a time duration. So access list, you either use a standard or an extended. And in some cases, you're going to want to use a time-sensitive access list, meaning you give someone a VPN, you assign that VPN connection an IP, and not only does that VPN have a time limit, but also the access list has a time limit too. Alright, number 4. So port forwarding and blocking. Big thing that people can do is they can bypass traffic by going through open ports. So for example, if you were to do like a net stat in your command prompt, you would see what ports are open. Now typically a BAS system is going to talk ports 80, ports 443, so it's important you know some of the core ports. Let's do this again. Port 80 is HTTP. Port 443 is HTTPS. Port 25, SNMP. Those are some of the more basic ones that you have open. Now, when you start talking BACnet, when you start talking Modbus, BACnet 47808, if I remember correctly, is the typical BACnet port. Then you got Modbus, you've got LAN, all sorts of different things, and you can have ports open. Now, these ports are typically going to be open at the layer 4 level. So they're going to be open at the transport layer. Sometimes they can be open at other layers, but the key point here, where we're going with checking your ports, okay? Let me go here. Ensure only the ports needed are open. Okay, so you should understand what ports are. So hopefully this thing won't make a liar out of me. Don't even remember if I can run. Yeah, I can run that stat. So it just shows which ports I have open. Now you can see that I am using right here, I'm using a private address. See, I've got some loopbacks going here, 127. Alright, you see that I've got port translation going. So if I were to run it again, kind of same thing's happening. Established, everything's going good. Shows which ports are open. Okay? Alright. So then VLAN segmentation. Well, we've already talked about segmenting into VLANs. We put the BAS server in its own, typically somewhere in a data center, in a closet where it's locked away. It's a good time to talk about security. You don't want the customer using the same computer that the server is. You don't want to just throw it on a desktop, stick it in an office or a closet and say, good luck. You want to stick it in a data center. Ideally, you want to virtualize the server. That way you have redundancy. You can have multiple virtual instances of the server so you can have instant failover. Okay, password and username practices. Pass is a bad idea. Or, for example, using your vendor's typical password, or using easy to discover passwords like 12345. So use some common sense. First off, everyone should have their own username. So usernames for each person. Passwords. I know it's a pain in the butt, but you want to time them out about every 6 weeks. Okay? You do it sooner if you're more high profile, and by goodness, if you're publicly exposing your control system, which you should not be doing, remember number 2, but if you are, for some crazy reason, I would do it once a month. Alright, and finally, set up access. Don't make everyone the administrator. That way they can go and delete audit logs and all sorts of stuff. Set things up and set them up in such a way that each person has the appropriate access to the right systems. Some people may not need access to Building 4 or Elementary School A, so don't give it to them. Don't allow them to have access to that automation engine or to that server. Okay. LDAP integration. Alright, so I'm not going to show you LDAP because then you'd be seeing my Active Directory and that wouldn't be great for security purposes. But you can set up group policies, you can set up user policies, you can make LDAP with most controls. You can integrate their logins, their passwords to the LDAP or Active Directory. So what you do is you work with the IT group. And then this is my Active Directory server right here. This is my server 2012 Active Directory server. And yes, I know, actually it should be. Let's put it in VLAN 20. It shouldn't be with the local client. Alright, but with that being said, there it is. And I work with IT and I say, hey, here's my system. I want to, one, set up my supervisory devices to be monitored, and granted that's the next point I'm going to make, but I want them monitored, but also I want everyone's username and password to be set up in Active Directory, so that way I can force password resets, I can monitor people who try to log in too many, I can flag them, I can set up group policies, rules. It just makes it really nice. So Active Directory whenever possible. It's a pain in the butt, especially on a new construction job where you've got a very skittish network connection usually because the building's not completely set up. And it's really a pain in the butt if it's a one-shot building and the customer doesn't have any of this. But you really want to do that. It allows a lot of monitoring. Alright, speaking of monitoring, SNMP. Most supervisory devices can be SNMP version 3. And you want to use version 3 because it has password. So SNMP v3 is going to allow you to log CPU usage, totalization, temperature, all these things with your devices. It's going to allow you to trigger if you've got an issue. Alright? So you want to use that. You want to use NetFlow. For example, if you're using Cisco, NetFlow is a great one. It shows all the IP traffic. You also want to be monitoring with LDAP people who are logging in. These are all basic fundamentals that you should be working with your IT group. So SNMP, NetFlow monitoring, basic group policy monitoring. Okay. Number 8. Alright, so I got a couple that some people posted in my LinkedIn group, and they said, hey, we'd like to see a couple different things. So awareness and training. Well, how do you discuss awareness and training for IT security? I mean, that's kind of an interesting one. I mean, hey, Bob, how do I get into the ABC system? Oh, it's password da-da-da, da-da-da. And that's typical. You know, the maintenance group sharing a single password for an entire system. You know, some kid overhears it, now he's got access to your system. You know, just basic awareness. You know, it's not the old days of pneumatics where you can go and install a system And hey, unless someone's got a spare compressor, they're just kind of lagging around behind them and they've got the way to power it, then you're probably not going to be too concerned about them overriding your system. But nowadays, with IT, everything going cloud-based, a lot of remote access, people expecting remote access, you just need to have awareness and training. And that is the biggest hurdle with guys who are used to cutting their teeth on fan belts and compressors and pneumatic actuators, and now you're trying to teach them IT security awareness. Well, risk management and analysis was the next thing. And, really, if you look at all these, you should avoid most of your risk if you kind of follow these steps that I laid out. And actually, this is going on long enough. I don't know if I'm going to write an article because I may write little brief nuggets, but if you follow what I've laid out so far, you're going to avoid most of your risk. Now, granted, if you're coming into a new site and you're putting in a new system, yeah, this is great. But if it's an existing site, then maybe you do want to do some risk management. I guarantee you, if you go in there and audit a BAS system and you work with the IT department, you could upsell on a lot of sites because there are very few controls companies out there who their technicians really understand the implications of IT security. They really don't get it. These are guys who their focus is something different. So for them to really understand, they usually, the subnet, the local network, stuff like that, IP address, subnet mask, default gateway. But beyond that, there's not a lot of people who know a lot of things about IT. Here's some things about patch management. The only thing I can say there is if your system's on LDAP and your server's on there, you gotta be careful because let's say you're running a system that depends on Java and IT pushes out Java 7.0 and now nobody can log in. So you've just got to be careful. You got to lay out the system requirements with the IT group and you got to set in update policies. And maybe that means, monthly they review it and make decisions on what they're going to update. And finally, some incident information management. So if there is something, how do you manage it? Well, I'll tell you, be quite honest. These systems do get broken into, and most of the time people don't know because no one's LDAP tracking it. No one knows that the username and password got brute forced, or heck, they've got a public IP exposed on the internet. Their firewall's not, guarding for ports that are associated with certain controls, and so they just pass right through, and no one ever knows. So the best thing you could do there is to follow these standards, use these monitoring systems, use these best practices, and then ideally that will result in you becoming hard enough of a target that people are going to avoid you because you can't be impenetrable. Nobody is. But if you are really hard to get into and your neighbor has his BAS system, and literally I've seen this, on his website, he's got on his company public website, got a exposed HTML page that has a URL link to his control system, and then you can just Google the vendor password for that control system and log in. Yeah, they're probably going to focus on that guy. So with that being said, we've went over some fundamentals of building automation security. This should give you an idea. If you're looking for a checklist, let's just recap real quickly. All right, let's first start with we want to have our IT department engaged. They're not your enemy. We want to work with them. We want to set up a clear username for each password for each person. We want to rotate passwords every several weeks. And then additionally, we want to set up groups. Okay? We want to set up permissions. We want to ensure that only the ports needed are open. And to that point, we also want to apply access lists to ensure that people can't access certain servers or access via certain clients. Don't want the marketing group logging in or the local computer science department logging in at a university to this control system. Ideally, the server should have a private class IP address. That's way it's not publicly exposed. If you have to do NAT for some crazy reason, at least do some backwards filtering on the firewall. Filter based off of what's coming inbound if you're not filtering what's going out. Segment by VLANs. Make sure servers and clients are segmented. Put the server in a safe spot. Use virtual machines for redundancy. Use LDAP. Take your Active Directory, create your usernames, monitor your devices, do penetration analysis. To that point also use SNMP. Get traps on if your devices are having abnormal usage. Use NetFlow to see which packets are going around. Do basic monitoring of your group policies. All the basic fundamentals of IT security around control systems. Alright, well, I'm sure this has sparked some conversation because this is something that surprisingly, I don't know how to say this, I'm not very politically correct. There's a lot of people who go on different areas and they post articles about IT security, and for the first paragraph it's great, and then after that it becomes some crapshoot marketing piece about how wonderful their product is or how they're reinventing IT security with BAS, but they don't give you any meats and potatoes. So hopefully this article, this video, is giving you some actual practical advice. And if anything in here didn't make sense, or if you've got a better way of doing it, I want to hear about it, because that's the point of this, is for everyone to learn. Furthermore, if any of this didn't make sense, let me know, because I'm here to share, here to help. And if I can explain something, if I can give you some ideas, help you answer some questions, that'd be great. That's what I'm here to do. So with that being said, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave comments, like this, share it with your friends. That's about it. That's all I can think of. So far, pretty good for a Sunday night. Alright, take care.